that we, thank you, so that we, so everyone who would like to listen can and learn. But if you are bringing any client material, please disguise it very well. As last time, you can post your questions in the chat. They don't just have to be questions, they can be thoughts, they can be reflections, they can be ideas. And also you can use the raise hand function, and you will, I think I can actually see it, but yeah, we've got it here. And then you can unmute yourself and ask a question. It's been great having Martha to guide us through her models, extraordinary and so rich and dense. And I don't want to take up any more time except to say that we are thinking about the possibility of trying to get together some workshops so that are kind of more experiential and embodied, to really try and digest some of the material that Martha presents. So we will let everybody know about those as and when we have more information. Okay, Martha, over to you.
Oh, good. Oh, perfect. And hello, Anita. I'm so glad you're here. And I see Adrian's dog again. All right. So really, I'm eager to have somebody raise a hand and ask something or say something. There's Anita. Thank you, Anita. And you can unmute yourself. And if nobody raises his or her hand, I'm actually going to call on some of you. So it's in your best interest.
Martha,
raise your hand.
I can kick things off if you like. I was listening to Don Carveth, who I don't actually know, but you might know, your side of the pond. And he was making a lovely comment about how so many theorists, and he was actually talking about cohort at the time, have come up with ideas which are essentially slices of the pizza, but making the assumption that it's the whole pizza. And I really like that your model takes the slices, and it isn't trying to say it's only this. And I remember once you and I talked and you said, well, I'm always constantly flipping my hat, whether I'm a model 1, and I thought it would be important for others to hear that kind of flexibility, to keep kind of moment to moment, as you say, attuning to what's actually present in the relational field in the moment, so that informs how you might respond.
Thank you for pointing that out, Adele. Yes, and so in essence, if the person is, now these are the N words. So if the person is in the moment struggling with some kind of neurotic conflict, so if neurotic conflictedness is the point of emotional urgency for the patient in that particular moment, then we don our model 1 hat. If it's more narcissistic vulnerability or narcissistic woundedness or narcissistic injury, that's the point of emotional urgency, the thing that would seem to be most troubling them, then we don our model 2, self-psychological and other deficit theories hat. If it's more noxious relatedness, notice the N words, noxious relatedness, whereby they are in the moment, focused on, and we're aware that they are unwittingly and compulsively reenacting some unmastered relational trauma on the stage of their lives and or in the treatment, and eliciting and recreating, in essence, the early on traumatic failure situation, then we're thinking in terms of noxious relatedness, and we don our intersubjective contemporary relational theory hat, model 3. And if in the moment they would seem to be sort of not really authentically present, so Arne Modell calls that affective non-relatedness. There's your N word, non-relatedness. Then we think in terms of model 4. And here I'm now, so whereas model 1 is enhancement of knowledge within, model 2, provision of corrective experience 4, model 3, engagement in relationship with, model 4, I've sort of more refined this. So Brian, for example, you haven't even heard this. It's nurturing of surrender to analytic oneness. Ofra Eshels, the Israeli psychoanalyst, her beautiful concept of what Michael Balint would call a blissful state of peaceful merger, and what all along I've been talking about as Masood Khan's helping the patient overcome, model 4, their dread of surrender to resourceless dependence. He says, Winnicott would say absolute dependence, and I would say, off of Ofra Eshel, dread of surrender to analytic oneness, the patient-therapist relationship. I really do feel that in model 4, if we're really going to get mileage here, and I do call this my existential humanistic perspective, that it gets corrected in the context of the treatment itself and the relationship between the patient and the therapist. So if there's non-relatedness because of relational absence, we don our model 4 hat because of non-relatedness. So model 1, neurotic conflictedness, model 2, narcissistic vulnerability, model 3, noxious relatedness, model 4, non-relatedness, and model 5, non-action. So when there's analysis paralysis, and this, as you know, is my quantum neuroscientific approach, and where the patient has these A words, awareness, they have model 1, awareness, insight, classical psychoanalytic, they have acceptance, model 2, they have accountability, model 3, and they are more authentically present, they are more accessible, they are more available. So they've done work on those dimensions, but nothing's changing in their lives. Non-action, analysis paralysis. And I certainly know I've had friends who they say like, oh, wow, I'm doing so much work. Things in my treatment, I'm so excited about it. I go a number of times every week. I've been going for years. I'm so excited. And then sort of like, meanwhile, you look at their lives and sort of like, yeah, but they're the same as they've always been. So from your point of view, anyway, it's sort of non-action, non-actualization, non-action. So the quantum neuroscientific model 5 is when the focus is on non-action, and the goal being to advance the patient to action, actualization of potential by taking action. And the word that Marlene Way and I have been working on to describe this is, it's sort of fractals. The idea that there are these ongoing healing cycles and iterative somethings where, so that's one round. That's one version, V1. Then there'll be another version and another version to advance them as they are continuously evolving from illness to wellness, or from rigidity to flexibility. So anyway, there you go. All right, now I hope, and hello, Hannah. Welcome to have you, glad to have you back. All right, so, and Erin there, and Janet, oh good. All right, and Paul. All right, so some questions, please. I hope I kind of got you warmed up a little bit there, and I'm eager to hear a question from somebody.
I wanted to ask something, Martha.
Yes, Robert.
What in your mind is dreaded in the analytic oneness?
Oh, yes. Oh, good. Well, the dread of surrender, the sort of giving oneself over to another, such that there are not then the moments of meeting that would give meaning, purpose, and direction to a life, a sort of illusions, in Modell's words, illusions of grandiose self-sufficiency, and a refusal to sort of let the other matter. And as a result, there is a sort of isolation and alienation, a sense of alienation. And there's a real bind for many of these patients. And again, this is a humanistic existential humanistic perspective. The terror is that the terror is that if they were to get close and to give themselves over to blissful union, peaceful merger, analytic oneness, that they would be devoured, they would lose themselves. On the other hand, and there would be disintegration of their ego, they would lose themselves. On the other hand, when they are pulled away and off in their own space, there too, there's the terror of the loneliness and the isolation. And so they're in this terrible bind. And so as I describe it in Model 4, the existential humanistic perspective, I have two ways to describe going from defense to adaptation. One is from, let's see, I don't want to see this. Okay, good. One is from relational absence, there's the R word, the defense, to authentic presence, there's the A word. That's the more humanistic way to describe it. But from a more existential point of view, and these are a lot of big fancy words here, but from nihilistic rejection, there's the R word, of existence, to existential acceptance, there's the A word, of its dualities, polarities, and complementarities, that it's both and. So the existential, it's not sort of like either we're connected or not, but rather coming to a place of acceptance that part of what life is all about is the underside of death and connection and disconnect, and it's both and. So from nihilistic rejection of existence because it's just too painful, heart shattered, to existential acceptance of its dualities. We don't ever get rid of the sort of existential angst or even some of the brokenness, but there's much more sort of acceptance of the reality that there'll be life and death, the polarities, the complementarities, the dualities, the more existential something, life and death. So that, thank you, is the dread. That's the terror of surrendering to analytic oneness, but also the terror and dread of then being so very isolated and disconnected and disengaged. So the name of my book that's about Model 4 is, if I can remember the title, it's A Heart Shattered, the private life, a heart shattered, the private self, and a life unlived, an existential humanistic approach to, I don't know, something, existential angst or something, brokenness, or I don't know, to something, to healing, to mending something. I don't remember the name of my book, but you get the idea. So there you go. Oh, good, Brian, you have a question. And unmute yourself there. Yeah, good.
Yeah, hi, Martha. I just wanted to pick up on what Robert just said. There was something that came, I think, through on one of the courses you did a while ago that to me really illustrated this, and it stuck with me. And I think there was a discussion thread where we were talking about the childhood game of everyone can remember being sort of upstairs and hiding behind a curtain in the house, and the excitement of waiting to be, the anticipation of waiting to be discovered, and then that horrible heart sink moment when you might think the game's actually finished and no one's really looking for you anymore.
That is beautiful. And Winnicott, of course, talks about that. Winnicott, he has this wonderful quote that I can't remember in the moment, but basically, right, that you're ambivalent. You're ambivalent about being found. You want to be able to be effectively hidden, but then devastated if it turns out that no one is even looking and you end up not being found. And so in Model 4, I think of it as the conflict between between lost and found, and hidden and seen. And my facilitation statement that is as a sort of generic statement, the facilitation statement in Model 4 is a part of you, you're yearning and longing to be found, to be seen, to be known, to be understood. But another part of you terrified of being not found. A part of you yearning to be seen and understood, but another part of you terrified of being found. Real conflict about whether or not, and what we talked about in that course was whether it's but or and. So I think I was a little bit thinking a part of you that is desperate to be found, but another part of you terrified of being found. But I think that as a result of the course, I came truly to appreciate that it's an acceptance of the dualities, and that it's not necessarily that the need to remain, the terror of being found isn't necessarily pathological, that it's both and, that we get to have, or certain people get to, I mean, I don't know, I'm still kind of working on that one, but a part of us yearning to be found and another part of us needing to keep ourselves hidden on some level. It's both and. We talked about that a lot, yeah, in the course. Yes. Yeah, thank you, Brian. Thank you.
It's a joy to be hidden and a disaster not to be found, I think.
That's the Winnicott quote. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Can I just make a request? Because someone said, can everyone please mute themselves? Or Robert, could you mute everyone from your end? Because there's quite a lot of background noise.
Right, unless you're actually going to ask a question, in which case unmute yourself. Thank you, I appreciate that. Okay, some other questions here. Let me see. No, I'm gonna start calling on you if you're not careful. Let's see, yeah, because so many of you I do know.
Garth,
Right.
do you have a question? I can see your hand raised. You have a question from
Oh,
Garth.
Susan almost had a question. Are we talking about?
I
Susan?
do. Hi there. Hi, Martha.
Oh, Garth. Oh, yes. Hello,
Yes.
Garth.
Hi. Hello. I was thinking back to an example you provided in your last lecture, which was about the client, and there was some competition, well, between the client and her friendships with women.
Oh,
And,
yeah.
and
The great tan bitch.
the great tan bitch. That's the one. And when that client left, there was a door handle moment where she said "great tan bitch" to the therapist.
Who had just come back from a week of vacation in Florida.
That's right, in Florida. Yeah. So and I think in the example you said that the therapist was sort of a bit numbed, a bit shocked into silence by that.
Had the defensive reaction of
there was
just
a defensive. That's right.
Too much for her to process, and so she sort of smiled lamely and said,
exactly, that's the one. And then I know it was raised in the following session, but I'm just thinking, I'm curious, how else could one have responded in that moment? I mean,
well, first of all, how do you feel about the way that the response that was, which is basically for this woman who had, the patient, who had made all sorts of advances in her life, but quite frankly, still had very few women friends, and there was tension for her and some upset for her around that, and that the therapist, a la Model 3, was able to interpret the noxious relatedness on the part of the patient, great tan bitch, and it sort of said, I wonder if, right, that what happens, this is an example of what happens for you when you find yourself feeling close to someone with whom you feel competitive.
Mm.
And so threw in someone, when you find yourself feeling close to someone and competitive, therefore.
Mm-hmm.
Close to a woman and therefore competitive. So not just sort of like, well, you're just some competitive bitch, you don't like it when other people have nice tans, but when you find yourself feeling close to someone and then competitive, which was indeed, and the patients are like, and again, this is interesting about the humanistic more perspective. I mean, yes, on the one hand, to sort of say like, oh my God, we called the patient competitive, like that's just terrible. And on the other hand, sort of like, yeah, I mean, and Terry Real talks about getting named some painful and difficult truths that on some level, though, the patient had known. And sort of like, I mean, and they are coming to therapy. I mean, they do know they don't have any women friends, et cetera, et cetera. So it's an example of, right, so that's why I myself feel comfortable with what the therapist said. But do you have a thought about an alternative response? Because I kind of like that one.
I think the response was great. I really appreciated it. But I think for me, there's a question about how could one potentially respond in that moment? You're on it's a door handle moment. The client drops this bombshell and it's
okay. So there's one, and forgive me, I'm not sure if I got into this or not, but the rule of 3 that I have, I think I did. I call it the rule of 3.
Yeah.
And when the patient does a provocative enactment, in
Yeah.
other words, they do something that the therapist experiences as provocative, right? That we have the choice of asking, how would you want me to respond to that? Were you
Right.
thinking more about the id? How are you hoping I would respond? How would you want me to respond? Id. How are you afraid I might respond to that? More superego. And or how do you imagine I'm going to respond to that? More the executive function of the ego. In this case, then, an alternative response would have been, how would you want me to respond to that? So now we're going to be asking, and again, it's not necessarily the answer that's so important as the fact that you've asked the question and you've said something, as opposed to just, oh, great tan bitch, oh, okay. Yeah, so you say something, how would you want me to respond to that? And it sort of highlights that there's model 3 intersubjective, there's sort of something going on in the here and now, the space between the two. So that would be a possibility. How would you want me to respond to that? And you say it was sort of not sort of like, how would you want me to respond to that? But sort of seriously, how would you want me to respond to that? And then the patient has to put into words her provocative something. And she might say, well, I don't know what she would say, but she would say something. But let's see if we can think of a third one. Let's think if we can think of another way, other than just sort of, oh, and smiling lamely and the patient leaves. So what else? Do people have some thoughts about what else could be said? Well, maybe Paul does. I don't know if Paul, Paul, do you have a thought in response
No,
to this?
mine is waiting for another question. Thank you for asking.
Okay, we'll get to you then in a second, Paul. And thank you for having a question, if I could be so bold. So Garth, can you think of some other way to respond? How would you respond? Oh, here, somebody said something. Debbie Allen said something. Wait, let me go to the chat.
I can tell you, she says, my analyst might say with a sense of humor, I guess we know where to start next time.
That's great.
That's good. That's good. That's good. That's a nice sort of a space saver, and that's good. And it also highlights that sort of like no provocative enactment goes sort of unnoted. So there's some sense of accountability, which also model 3 is about accountability for the provocative enactments, for what patients will play out unmastered relational traumas. Very nice. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yes. Oh, good. Oh, I see. Yes, there is this chat.
Okay.
Okay, Paul. Oh,
All right.
Paul.
Should I go?
Yes, Paul. Oh,
Okay,
good. Hello, Paul.
okay.
Oh, good.
Thank you. Yes, by the way, I come here through my colleague, Dr. Bob Dewars, who I think you know, and
Yes.
He referred me, and I'm very grateful for that and to be here. So I've listened to your other
Thank you,
things
Paul.
that was in the last one, and sort of tried out your ideas with conversations with people. So here's a quick case, a hypothetical client, let's say, and the person talking to that client is very triggered by the client really giving the therapist no chance to talk. There's no air in the room. She's taking it all. She says that, or he or she, this client says, I'll say they.
Let's make up the name so we can just do this. So
Okay,
the client is named
Susan.
Susan.
There's no real Susan. Okay, so
Yep,
Susan says,
that's fine.
and this is a pattern of people finding it really difficult to relate to Susan.
No
And
surprise. No
What?
surprise.
Yes.
No surprise.
And my therapist is triggered herself in this example, and Susan's basically driving her crazy. And we talk about your model 3, where you're using transference and engaged, triggered authentically, and the person has this highly sophisticated mechanism to explain her behavior, where she knows about things like, for instance, mirror neurons, and she says she just doesn't have them, so she doesn't know how to be different. And I would just—
Any different from the way she is, that she is,
Yeah.
this is the way she is.
This is the way she is, and people just have to like accept it because she can't.
So by the way,
change.
I'm thinking model 4 and model 5 in there, but we'll get to that. Right. But so
Okay.
she says this is the way she is when she's
Yeah.
been challenged in her time.
Yes. And so I'd just love to hear your thoughts on how you
Oh,
would
good.
approach it.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thank
yeah,
you. Thank you. And my best to Bob Dewars as well. All
okay.
right. So at some point, first of all, I have certainly been known to say, wait a minute, wait. I want to understand what you just said there. So I've certainly, so they're talking and literally, wait. No, say it again. Wait, I want to understand that. So even if they're just going on and on and on, so we'll call her chatty Susan and off-putting Susan and so on, and not all that available Susan, and non-action and conditioned Susan. So we can call her some numbers of names while we're at it, models 3, 4, and 5. So first of all, I can absolutely interrupt, and I will. I might say, for example, it's important to you that I understand, and then she's talking about something like what happened at dinner last night. It's important to you that I understand all the details of what happened last night so that I can really get it. Or it's important to you to be letting me know all the details so that you don't leave out anything that might actually be important to a way of our understanding what was going on for you last night at dinner. So I may be right, I may not, but so that's one possibility. I'm sort of zeroing in on what's happening in the here and now. I'm also, so noxious relatedness, I'm thinking, I might say you're wanting, yeah, same thing. You're wanting to make sure that you're able to convey exactly what it is that happened, or exactly what it is that you're feeling. And I'm a little bit, you're afraid, are you concerned that I might miss something, or that something might be missed, and wanting to make sure that everything gets said so that, and then I'm gonna, like I might get it sort of listing, I might get it that it's important to her that she not be misunderstood, that she be able to convey exactly what it is that was going on for her, important for her not to be misunderstood, that it's very painful for her. Again, I'm sort of leaping here, and she'll say, well, no, it's not painful, but just I'd rather not. I mean, but again, at least I'm a little bit, just because I want to, engaging with her. All right, that's one thought. A second thought is, if this triggered therapist, is triggered by this and hasn't found a way to sort of become involved and so on, Winnicott would talk about objective versus subjective countertransference, where objective countertransference is what anybody would feel, and probably anybody would feel rather a little bit put off. Subjective countertransference, though, is when it's particular to this particular therapist who really doesn't like being talked at and put off. Now, for me, because I'm willing to say, wait, but I want to understand, and I'm like listening to the words and trying to figure out something, some kind of empathic intervention to tease out the affect and the associated theme, because I'm busy doing that myself, I would be less likely to be triggered. However, just as an aside, something that absolutely triggers me, and it has really been an issue with one of my patients, is, and I know, so this is subjective countertransference here. She parks her car in disabled parking spots, and she's not disabled. Now, I've mentioned that to some people, and they say, okay, well, she shouldn't do that. For me, I'm like, I mean, maybe it's because I would want to, I don't know, but sort of like, and it's really been an issue because she gets it. So we're trying to negotiate at our intimate edge, and not just sort of that she won't then park in disabled spots. And at this point, she doesn't anymore, but for us to sort of deal with our dynamic and negotiate at our Darlene Ehrenberg's intimate edge. All right, but anyway, so I'm thinking that this therapist who gets triggered, we want to help this hypothetical therapist have more effective ways to become more involved in the treatment here, in the relationship. All right, but so it's important to whatever, let's see, model 4. So model 4, I'm thinking that this is someone who, you know, is hasn't yet overcome their dread of surrender to analytic oneness. And so they just need to be talking at, and they're terrified of getting too close. And so when Arne Modell talks about affective non-relatedness and the illusion of grandiose self-sufficiency, this sort of flatness of affect, so that also accompanies this. One could think, so here's a new point that I want to make, that the person has, rationalization, compartmentalization, isolation of affect, those sort of standard defenses that we think about, Freud talked about, Anna Freud talked about. But those are one-person defenses, and more a story about the patient's internal, intrapsychic, structural neurotic conflict. And on an island, all by themselves, they're conflicted about stuff. Like on an island, they're afraid to masturbate, or they don't masturbate because they feel guilty about it, or they're flat affect or whatever. That's just who they are. Whereas affective non-relatedness, which is just sort of on and on and on in this sort of flat monotonic going on and on and on, this Susan, hypothetical Susan, that's a two-person defense. It has to do with the terror of being lost and lose themselves, like what we've been talking about. So that's model 4 stuff. So to appreciate the patient's need then to keep you at bay, even as the keeping of you at bay, it makes them feel very isolated and alone. And model 5, this conditioned self, it's sort of like the narrative, the old bad narrative. Well, just, this is the way I am. I mean, this is the way I am. And so I think in the moment, I'm going to go to model 1, and I'm going to offer a conflict statement. And I'm going to say, that, because again, in model 1, we always start with, well, we do any of a number of things, but one of the things we could do is a conflict statement, which tends to start with not what we know, but what they know, because it's an internal conflict that we are sort of focusing on in the moment, which is their sense that this is the way they are. Okay, so we say, that if you are ever to get better, that there will need to be some things that you change. All right, now how do they feel about that? Anxiety goes up. All right, that's okay. We're talking optimally stressful. That's okay. If all we do is say, well, first of all, if we just simply said, you need to change some things if you're ever going to get better, that'd be horrible. So we at least say, that if you're ever to get any better, you'll need to change some things. We put in those qualifiers and we highlight what but they're going to say, no, but I just can't, I can't. So in the second part of the conflict statement, we're going to articulate on their behalf what we're guessing might well be their defensive reaction. That if you're ever to be able to feel any better about your life, or whatever their chief complaint has been, if you're ever to be able to feel that you have any kind of connection with people that really matters to you, or that enables you to feel anything other than just so alone and so isolated, that you will need to make some changes, nonetheless, you find yourself feeling that this is just so who you are and how you've always been and what you've needed to do in order to survive, that you just really can't imagine actually changing this piece here about that this is just whatever that thing is, just the way you are. Even though that technically at some point, probably there need to be some changes, at the moment, you're just sort of feeling sort of like, no, this is too much. Or we could say at the moment, what you're feeling is, listen, I am this way because of stuff that happened to me early on. This is the damage for life and therefore not responsible now part. I just am this way. I just, whatever, I've told you about that. My parents, whatever, damage for life, right? And so on. And so I can't do any better. This is the best that I can do. All right, so that's 3, 4, and 5. I hope that, Paul, helps hypothetical Susan and the triggered therapist.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And hearing you talk about specific cases and how you apply this stuff is like golden. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Paul. All right, good. So we have Susan is next here. Susan, please. Unmute yourself. Good. And now we'll get to see the picture of you too, I think, when you talk. Oh, good. There you are.
Appropriate name after that discussion. Let's see. So my question is about ISTDP.
Intensive short-term dynamic psychotherapy.
Right. And currently, actually, I'm learning a version of this that's kind of a softened version.
A softened of Habib Davanloo, a softened down version.
A softened Davanloo, because it kind of melds in AEDP.
Diana Foch's accelerated experiential dynamic psychotherapy.
Yes. So
because that works for you better than the more aggressive something that feels better for you.
Absolutely. because
Good.
you know,
So
that's-
you're doing, so rather than stretching yourself to something that really feels not you at all, you're stretching yourself a bit and learning this somewhat newer way, but it's a softer version, which feels more right to you.
you got it right on.
I do. Yes.
So, you know, it is concerned with using our time in therapy more effectively, you know, than I know that you referred to a lot of psychodynamic work in the past has gone on for decades, and
Yeah.
for what purpose?
And to what
Okay.
end? Yeah.
Right. And there's you know, I'm noticing that there's like a more active work with defenses in
Which
that.
is why for me in model 5, when I'm using a word, you know, model 1 cognitive, model 2 affective, model 3 relational, model 4 existential, care, model 5, I sometimes say constructivist, and sometimes I say more directive, where the therapist is more likely to lead than in models 1, 2, 3, 4, more directive on the
Oh,
part of the therapist, a more direct something. Because
okay.
there's less time and sort of like, let's move it here, let's move it along here. Instead of letting the patient more be the leader in model 5, once it's understood that patient and therapist are on the same page and we're wanting to move forward, there's non-action, there's neural entrenchment, we're kind of stuck here, we want to move forward here. And now it's sort of an invitation to the therapist to be able to be more directive. So for me, yes, more directive.
Oh, I didn't realize that was part of your model 5. Okay.
I hadn't named that, but it is.
Okay, thanks. So, yeah, I was just basically wondering, you know, if you had incorporated, you know, ideas from that approach, which you just said.
Oh, yes.
You
Oh,
do.
yes.
And just, you know, your thoughts about it, you know.
Oh, I mean, I just love it. So I've gone to Poland. I love the Polish people several times. They've invited me to their conferences, but as it happens, I'm a little bit afraid of international travel. So they had arranged for me to be able to go with the wonderful Patricia Coughlin, Coughlin. And we were on the same panels and this and that. And she was the whole trip there, just, you know, educating me and informing me. And then we're all on the same panel and so on. So that was one of a number of exposures that I've had to ISTDP. And I just think it's sort of incredible. I love what she does. I love what they do. And so interestingly, so I'll tell you this, back in 1994, I had just published, well, first I wrote Working with Resistance for Jason Aronson. And that was my first book. And it was all done and so on. And then Jason Aronson said, yeah, but I want you to write the primer on Working with Resistance. I think I'd mentioned this before. So those 2 books, I did write the primer, came out in 1994. All right. Literally a week later, some friends of mine from New Hampshire had said, Martha, there's this amazing Habib Davanloo. He's giving a 6-hour-long talk up in New Hampshire. Come up and listen to this man. And I didn't know who Habib Davanloo was, even though he's an analyst and he trained in Boston, where I'm from. But so, okay, I always want to be exposed to new stuff. So I sat there and listened to this man for 6 hours. And this is what I thought. I just written my 2 books on Working with Resistance. And I just thought, oh my God, he who had been around for decades and famous and so well known and absolutely brilliant. I just written my 2 books and I thought, oh my God, I must have copied from him. A softer, gentler version. But like what I do is so much like, but softer and gentler than what he does, that literally I must have copied from him. Now I hadn't, because I hadn't known his work, and certainly he didn't copy from me, he'd been around for decades. But so there are a lot of similarities there in terms of my model 1. So I'm is there something about ISTDP, Susan, that you find particularly exciting or engaging, something you wouldn't otherwise have thought to do?
Well, it's more upfront kind of engagement with defenses, just more direct and confronting around the cost and just acknowledging.
Yes, there's so understanding, and this is a sentence that I wrote in one of my slides, although I took it out, but I just now put it back in. We are always, and defenses are always ambivalently cathected, meaning invested. with both libidinal, positive yes, and aggressive, negative no energy. And so our defenses, there's an upside and a downside. And so because of that ambivalent attachment to our defenses, that's why they are relinquished only with reluctance. So if indeed we do, and I do believe that, again, copying from ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, and from the ISTDP people and the AEDP people, and psychoanalysis and ego psychologies, that the goal is to get from rigidity to more flexibility, from rigid defense to more flexible adaptation, then indeed we need to be appreciating that the defenses that we're trying to relinquish slash transform slash incrementally morph into adaptation, that they are ambivalently cathected, or in Freud's words, the adhesiveness of the id, which involves both aggression and libido. And deeply appreciating that. And if indeed, and some of the short-term intensive folks, and again, I now call it short-term intensive, those are both good words. And instead of longer term in depth, I have corrected myself. I don't say in depth anymore. Shame on me. I say longer term, broader based. Because I do think, I mean, the analytic stuff, I mean, I think it is broader based. I mean, I can say that. So short-term intensive. So as I say, my ideas here, whether it's crisis intervention, trauma work, short-term intensive, and or longer-term broader based. The goal is to get from defenses that are ambivalently cathected and relinquished only with reluctance, to adaptation. And calling upon Freud's metaphor of the horse and the rider, which I think is kind of a wonderful evocative metaphor for how, as his is a little more id and ego oriented, that's fine. As you tame the id, tame the horse, and strengthen the ego, give the rider more experience, then the rider, the ego, will be made less anxious and will therefore be less inclined to mobilize a defense to put a lid on the id and to rein the horse in tightly. And rather, the rider, now more experienced, and the horse, now more tame. So tame the id and strengthen the ego. Now horse and rider can work together harmoniously in sync, and what had been conflict can be morphed into, gradually, incrementally transformed into collaboration. So you don't lose, or the kid who was aggressive and, you know, wanted to, I guess, had a knife and wanted to slash things or whatever. A sublimation of that is they're now a surgeon. But so you don't lose the original energy. The energy in the id gets tamed and provides the propulsive fuel. And in all of these, it's not like we just get rid of the defense and we become adapted, but rather we channel and harness that energy into something that is more adaptive.
Very
Thank you. I never even quite said that before until you prompted me with the optimally stressful question you gave me. You prompted me to evolve my thinking to a slightly higher level. So I thank you, Susan, for that.
I want to think about what you told me, what you just said, and I'm going to have to think about it.
There you go. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
All right. So we have maybe some more questions here. I'm looking to see.
I have a question.
Oh, yes. Good. And that would be
Deb Faloran.
Oh, Deb. Oh, Deb. Hello, Deb. Okay. And you'll let us see you so your picture comes up.
How do here we go. No, I don't.
Stop video. I mean, video. Show yourself on the video in the lower left.
Oh, I think it's on stop video. No?
No, video. Make it video. Not stop video, but video. Where you unmuted yourself. We want you to video yourself now so we can see you.
Start video. How about that?
Start video.
Does that work?
Yes, there you are.
Oh,
Hi.
okay. Hi. Hello, my darling. Okay.
Are we allowed to say this, that you live in the condo that we.
You're allowed to say anything you want, as far as I'm
Deb
concerned.
lives in the condo that my dear sweet Gunnar and I sold her 30 years ago.
Yes, and you made me whole in that way. So a couple of things. I have been trying to use your language, and I'm so tongue twisted at this point in some of my sessions that I've had to pull back. And I've learned a lot about how to pull myself out so that they own more of their experience. So
oh, good. That's a beautiful way to describe it.
Yeah. And now I'm thinking most of the couples work or short-term family work that I do, you have based a lot of this on talking about the development of the relationship you have with your patient, which allows you the language to say to them and use words that are provocative back, like you are competitive. Or you know that whatever.
Yeah.
In short-term treatment, what you're now just saying after a few minutes ago, in terms of not a deeper therapy, but a more inclusive.
More inclusive.
Where do you get your confidence to say things when you haven't been working with someone or a family or a couple for very long?
They have said, as long as they have words, I'm going to use their
I've
words.
used their language.
Their language. So in the first session, they come into the emergency room, and I think I said this, but I used to think, oh, I don't do short-term work. That's a defect in me. And then I realized, sort of like Martha, for decades, you've been doing consultations on patients in stuck places, and it'll be 1 session, 3, 5, 10 sessions, and you get something done. So I listen to their language and I use their words back.
Okay. All right, now I just learned something. I do use their words, and I'm always anxious when I go in. After 40 years of doing this work, those are the situations where I'm more anxious to say things earlier on.
Really, because you're wondering if the relationship has evolved enough that you can sort of get away with. But if you use their words, aren't they going to feel deeply heard? So it's how you say them then, isn't it? Right. So we don't, the patient says, I just feel I'm really ugly. And we don't say, given that you feel so ugly. I mean, you know, obviously we don't say that. Can you just give me a sentence that a patient, maybe a hypothetical one, maybe one of Paul's hypothetical ones, but that a patient might say? A sentence.
What they might say.
Make it up. Make it hard for me.
I can tell you just a recent. The husband says in a couple session, and he has said this over and over in the last 5 hours. We've had 5 sessions. She can't stop being angry. I can't take it anymore. We've been married 20 years. We have 2 sons. She has to stop this. I had one indiscretion. And when is she going to stop?
She can't forgive me. She won't forgive me.
She won't forgive me.
So what
and I've apologized a million times. And he said the story a million times.
Yes.
Well,
yes.
In 5 hours.
You should probably be apologizing for having said the story so often. But anyway, that was a joke. All right. One thing I might end up saying is when I'm working with a couple, I might say something like, so there you are wishing that she would, blah, 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 and there she is wishing that you would, blah, 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 blah. Each of you wishing, desperately wishing the other would just, goddamn it, change and be more in keeping with what you would so wish they could be. I might say that because she also has her complaints. And if not, I'm going to have sort of tried to ease my way into understanding what some of her complaints might be about him. So he has so very many about her. She can't this, she can't, I can't take it. Blah, 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 blah. So I had the one indiscretion, like, my God, she wouldn't. And she, though, has her complaints about him.
What if we've gotten to the point where they are, what did you call it?
Co-create.
Hoping, they won't surrender.
Yeah, unrelenting. Yeah. Well, so at least though I'm going to name the fact that they're both doing the same thing. which didn't necessarily change it, but naming that it's not just he who's ever busy complaining about her and relentlessly wishing that she would be something, but she who's ever busy complaining about him. In this case that you're talking about, aren't there ways in which she is so very unhappy with him? And if not, I'm going to give her more space to articulate and name it, because I'm sure she doesn't like it that he is ever busy enraged at her.
Well, that's where we're at, that she's got now some space to talk about, for the first time in 20 years, her complaints.
Okay, perfect. So that's one of the main things. So you get to say it's hard for her. So here's an empathic statement. These are minimally stressful, something maybe. And I might say it's hard for her to put into words exactly some of the things he does. Perhaps, qualifiers, perhaps it's hard for her to find the words or to put into words some of the things that he does that actually, you know, upset her. Now, she has to say yes to that, right? I mean, she's not happy, right? So it's hard for her, perhaps, so we pause, perhaps, you know, it's hard for you, I said to her, hard for you to sort of think of the words or think about how you would want to describe some of what he does that ends up sort of not working so well for you. And she'll nod.
Yeah.
Yeah, you are nodding. I mean, she will nod. Yeah. I mean, and then may even start crying a little bit and just sort of, yeah, I mean, it's hard for me. I mean, he's just like shouting at me all the time. And, you know, I am upset about the affair he had, and it is hard for me to sort of whatever. So then we get them sort of back and forth. So I'm busy. The other thing I'll do with couples, this is sort of, you didn't ask about this, but this is what I do when I work with couples, because I kind of love working with couples, where I don't focus as much on the transference and I talk more about the transferential elements in their relationship. I will often at the beginning, and I do point my finger, which I know you're not really supposed to do that, but anyway, so I'll say, please, I use their names, I use their first name, they use my first name, and I'll say, you know, please, will you tell me his history? And to him, please, you tell me her history. And that's the way to keep them both very involved. So rather than he tells me his history, he tells me his history, she tells me hers, I have them tell each other's history. And it's so interesting because she starts out, it's happened recently, she starts out and she says, he hates his mother. And so, wow, that's not the way he would have started his story. And she says, well, he hates his mother, he always has. And of course, guess what? As it turns out, he kind of hates her too on some level, the woman, the wife, which a little bit is what she was probably getting at. So anyway, so that a little bit answers your question, Deb, a little bit.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm more confident that I'm, you know, headed in the right direction.
If they know.
But it's going to take a lot of practice to use those conflict statements.
Yes.
To change my language a little bit more to really separate myself out.
So how might you have said it? So again, not to put you on the spot, but like instead of the conflict statement, you might have said, you would wish that I would answer that question directly, or you wish your mother would apologize, or
I can think more of an example in maybe individual.
Okay, individual. Let's go with individual.
Oh boy.
And where you're trying to put it.
This is very interesting because of all the notes that I take. I find today especially, I find myself going back to, of all the patients, 2 people. Over and over, I'm thinking these are the 2 that
are most challenging.
In terms of getting them to surrender or something.
Getting them to relent. Okay.
Relent. Okay. So when
and again, let me just say, it is true that eventually we want to sort of reposition you so that it's not about your trying to get them to relent, but rather for them to be able to appreciate, come to recognize that unless they relent, they will continue to be miserable. So we do have some agenda there a little bit because we're wanting them to see, but it's not so much, this is directly in line with what you'd said, that you find yourself sometimes becoming a little too involved in wanting them to relent. And I'm saying, if you back off a little bit and we're going to try this in a moment, the conflict named in them, it's for them to realize that they need to relent or they're going to continue to be miserable.
So here's the example.
Okay.
A patient, the same, one of the two men.
Let's
one of the two-
make up a name. I like the name.
John.
John. Mhm.
John is very stuck. Lots of talent, and is so stuck.
And I'm thinking model 1. I'm thinking model 5. Very stuck.
So
And model 1.
So, yeah.
And I'm
So
thinking
he
probably model 2. He's unrelenting. So 1, 2, and 5.
And yeah, so he calls me, last session. He's been invited to present his very wonderful work in another state, and he knows what I'm going to tell him to do. That
Ooh,
already
so
tells you
already a
something.
little bit.
Okay, there you go. So he
yes,
already knows what I'm going to tell him to do. That he should go and not stay home like he's has a, what he does. He doesn't want to participate in the world. He stays home. He goes to work, he makes a living, but he's hopelessly in his not going to be active.
But so you see what a little bit, the dynamic that's going on between the two of you. And by the way, I have this with some of my people too, of course, but you tell him to do stuff. And he sees you as telling him to do stuff. You're going to tell me I should do it. And so let's even just work with that it maybe happened earlier. So maybe you'd said you should do it. So, and a conflict statement would be,
I give myself a little credit. I would say you know you should do it.
Oh, okay, good. You know you should do it, but then he has, thank you. So that's the first half.
But he's still relying on me.
Okay, you find yourself feeling that unless you hear it from me, it doesn't count. You find yourself feeling, that's a nice sort of minimally stressful little just naming of something. You find yourself thinking and feeling that unless it comes from me, unless I say, gee, then it doesn't really count. So he finds himself feeling that his own sense of things isn't going to be good enough, isn't going to guide him enough, and that he is then ever busy looking to the outside, in particular to you, to provide him with the guidance he feels he needs, because he feels that he doesn't know it, because he feels he's so damaged from way back that he doesn't really know what it is that would be best for him. And so he looks to the outside to provide for him now, and in fact feels, quite frankly, that he really needs that input in order to know what to do next. I went way on, but I bet that on some, I wouldn't say all that at once, but I bet that that's the dynamic.
Yeah.
Might that be the dynamic?
Yes, absolutely. So thank you for this wonderful supervision.
My pleasure, Dan. My pleasure. And good for you for right. You know that, and you just need to do the second half. You know that that this is something you should probably do if indeed you're wanting to, and again, his words, advance yourself in your career, make more money, have more of a presence, right? His words, whatever he said, comma, but you find yourself thinking, oh, no, it's too anxiety provoking. I'm not sure I'll do a good enough job. It makes me very, no. You find yourself hesitating, thinking like, oh my God, no, maybe this, no, I don't think I can do it because I'm just not going to do a good enough job or whatever, but you've listened to him. So you're able to name what it is he's going to say as the reasons. Oh, no, I can't, no. It wouldn't be good enough. It wouldn't be good enough. I can't do it. So we all need to be listening well enough to them to understand why it is that they wouldn't indeed accept the speaking engagement, that we come to understand it. We come to understand both sides of their ambivalence about moving forward, both sides of everything. And this is where as one of my minimally stressful statements, I talked about 2 parts, both and statements, where we recognize both sides. We just sort of name them while we're at it. A nice minimally stressful little statement. And we say, right, a part of you, and now we do some parts, deference to Dick Schwartz and IFS is a little simplified version, but a part of you does know that doing this would probably be something, putting qualifier, probably be something that you should do. But another part of you is sort of thinking, wait a minute, I have too much on my plate already. I'm not sure I really need to do it. It's a little scary. I got other things. No, I don't want to do it. You just kind of name them just while you're at it. You're ever busy highlighting. And in fact, as I've been working on formulating my how-to playbook for the middle game in psychodynamic psychotherapy, I'm realizing increasingly, and also with Hannah Levinson's help, I'm realizing the importance of creating, teasing out the players and creating mismatch experiences between the yeses and the nos, the upside and the downside of anything. Because most of us are ambivalent about most things most of the time. And you want to name both and just name them, and or sometimes create tension between them, but sometimes just name them. Sometimes create tension, mismatch experience, which will be optimally stressful, growth incentivizing, and ultimately they will let go of this thing that hasn't worked so well for them in favor of more flexibility, something that will work better. Thank you, Deb. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. All right, now let's see.
I can't wait for the dance part.
Oh, the dance part. Oh, yes. It will come
Coming up
soon.
now. Martha,
It will come soon.
hit 6 o'clock. We've hit 6 o'clock UK.
We've hit 6 o'clock, so we can.
Are we dancing? Are you happy?
Oh, yes.
To move on? Yeah.
Yes.
To wrap it up.
Okay, Devin started off learning, to be a surgeon. Who knew that? Thank you, Hannah. Can I just look real quickly? My analyst said, yep. A hard shout to the private self and life unlived.
There's a long message from one of the participants, which maybe we can save the chat and send to
Yeah,
you.
you'll save that, Robert, please, for me, and then I can look at some good thoughts here that people have. Oh, good. Thank you so much. All right. Well, so please, all of you who are here on the line, please stay on for the next 3.5 minutes so we can all kind of rock out together, because Robert is going to play us Elton John and Dua Lipa's song, Cold Heart. Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. I'm available by email, marthastarkmd@synergymed.solutions. And you can go to my website, which is synergymed.solutions. And see additional offerings. And then, as Adele mentioned at the beginning, we're going to put together some little consultation supervision groups, Anita, and Gina, that will be happening in May, June kind of thing. And so you'll be kept updated because you're on our mailing list. So I hope you'll think about joining us for those.
Okay, lovely. Thank you so much, Martha. It's been absolutely wonderful. I'm sure everyone's appreciated it. And Robert, I think, is about to play some music.
Yeah,
Robert.
I'm also going to, one of the things I play is giving people book titles based on their work. And today, your new book title is Getting Deeply Gotten.
Oh,
Okay.
Getting Deeply Gotten. Oh my God. Thank you so much. That is lovely. I accept that unambivalently. I love that.
Good. So, and from a cold heart to a warm heart.
Oh.